Blood and Briar. Chapter 4. Newcomer. The man in George's truck was young enough to be called young, but not to be called boy. The term man had become fluid enough these days that any assumption of the sort brought either snuffling scorn or blatant outrage. George left the matter alone, having never experienced any such emotion from any man at being called a man. A man was a man, after all, as long as he didn't make too much a deal over it one way or the other. How big was the funeral? The unexpected break in silence levitated in the air-conditioned truck for a moment longer than needed. George Grass rubbed his chin, unable to remember the man mentioned his name. George was quick to suspect the man's motives for asking that question, sitting in his truck as a complete stranger. Of all the questions to ask, this was the first. Can't say. I'm not one to tally heads at a funeral. George cleared his throat. More important things to think about. At a funeral, at least. The young man shifted in the seat and watched the world go by. I was just curious. Curiosity, it's a good thing for sure. Was curious how you could have a funeral. You just have one. No big deal. George watched a flurry of birds erupt from a deer carcass hidden in the tall ditch grass. Spend too much time in town and the sight of dead things along the road becomes shocking. Eventually, there's a funeral for everyone. George cracked the window. At first, the air conditioning was refreshing. The day was hot and humid. Now the truck was cold and growing uncomfortable. The young man smelled the dust to the window, with hints of the dead deer. He didn't want to cross any line and crack a window himself. The goosebumps along his arms relaxed from the fresh, warm air coming in over George's shoulder. The truck was almost new, and exactingly maintained. The young man couldn't spot a single grain of sand on the carpet or a dust particle in the seat threads. He almost felt guilty riding in the passenger seat for all of his own stained clothes. The young man persisted with his questions. A funeral for a body that wasn't there? George Grass frowned. A body not there? He stopped rubbing his chin. Unless a body was found. A body? What do you mean about a body? There was a body, right? At the funeral? You're curious as hell about it. How would you know if there was or wasn't a body there? Was there a body? George snorted. Not unless someone snuck the old man in through the back door in the dead of night. He chuckled at the vision of masked goons cramming a stiff old man in the casket, plucking dead grass off his clothes and dusting him off like something out of an old lady's knick-knack cabinet. At least I heard nothing of the sort, just a closed casket. Just for the sake of having something there? There was plenty there. You don't need to worry about it. It was very proper. Proper even without a body? There's nothing in this town that doesn't fall in line. Very proper indeed. Just odd that a funeral would have no body. Happens lots of times. My aunt's husband's remains were nothing more than a folded flag. 2 boys in town were in the Middle East and came back minus a body. George rubbed his thumb in the steering wheel. A hero doesn't need a body to be honored. So the old man died in a war? Christ, buddy, don't you worry. Life is war. Everywhere war. So yeah, the old man died in war. George eased his temper by winking at the young man. Body or not, I'm sure he was there in spirit. Small H. And the big H, too. Big H? Big H. He, the man, the main man. George pointed up towards the sky. If you say so. The young man rubbed his hands. If I say so? Grass looked over the hood of his truck as a bird darted over the grill. That's for damn sure. The old man lived in town, too? George scrubbed his face where a line of sweat tickled, feeling a sharp edge of a torn nail. The wife got on him about clipping his fingernails a few days ago. He thought he was being funny when he claimed he was going to paint them just like she did. His old lady, being who she was, offered to pick him out a proper color. Yeah, he did. His wife didn't like the farm any more than a wife would, and bought a small place in town. When she died a few years back, and when the old man got too old to piss on his own, he moved into her house, closer to town. George Grass glanced at his passenger, uncertain whether to be sympathetic to a simpleton or annoyed at someone being deliberate. But he died at the farmhouse? That's what I heard. But I heard different things from different people. He died. That's the only thing that matters. What does anything else matter? Strange if he was too old to live on his own. What does it matter? Old men lose their minds. They get confused and make a mess of things. My wife is always saying that I'm going crazy when I can't find my car keys or forget to put gas in the mower. Just going nuts. George glanced at the young man. I didn't quite catch your name? I didn't say. No kidding. George glared as the young man stared out into the passing countryside. George grew impatient. So, what's your business here? I didn't say that either. No, you didn't. But you're sounding a little simple-minded, asking simple questions you should already know the answers to if you belong where you're at. Simple-minded? Stubborn, whatever it is. Be a proper fellow and shake a man's hand and say your name and be properly friendly. I'm not very gifted at being friendly. That's plain to see. You're plenty gifted anyways. What's your relation to the old guy? I didn't say. I only ask because you don't look anything like him. Grass looked over the young man's clothes and shoes. One could tell a lot by the clothes, if the fellow was a slacker, a bum, or a hard worker. Poor didn't mean a thing. If the shoes were old and tattered but had steel toes and heavy soles, it meant the fellow was a working man. If the shoes were particularly clean and stylish, it usually meant he was a fool with his money or meticulous without sense. Of course, he could hear his wife snap at him, "George, stop being so judgmental." With some degree of scorn, George concluded the young man was a bit of a bum, wearing cheap leather shoes with one split at the heel, stained jeans, and a shirt with frayed cuffs and collar. The young man certainly didn't look married at all. George checked for a gold band of some sort, a signifier that the young man was worthy of a woman's time. He didn't know too many young men who weren't properly married. Either they were thugs or miscreants, suffering the consequences of their actions. Of course, there were ladies who liked either kind of man, enough for a man of low self-respect to get himself attached. And no wife would let her property wander out into the world looking like a stray, unaware of how to take care of himself. There was an odor of dish soap under the young man's sweat, from his having haphazardly washed his clothes in a sink. So the young man was worthy of scorn, having nothing to his name other than his name, whatever his name was. It wasn't the name he was borrowing, the name which brought him here. The smell of a dead man's money brings all sorts, from all corners of the world, and all corners of low character. Can't help what I look like. What? George stammered for a second. That there's no family resemblance. Can't help that at all. Maybe you can. Grass turned down a road towards the old farmhouse. Maybe you can. You can change my face? Sometimes it just takes a little change in attitude. The young man adjusted in the seat. How did he die? The same way lots do. George Grass became instantly irritated that he didn't know this man's name. Dillard didn't say. George didn't ask, and he should have. That's what Dill would say if George brought it up. You should have asked. The fellow must have assumed George already knew. No handshake and no proper greeting, as if George was just a taxi driver. George was more a man than a taxi driver, and that he felt offended for being treated so didn't matter to good old Dillard. George made up his mind. He would not like this man, no matter how this turned out.